All right, so this is going to be a fun one. I thought it'd be fun to kind of go back in time and look back on the past year and hold myself accountable for the things that I absolutely missed on, but also pound my chest a little bit for the things that we nailed and got right on the year, and just talk about the things that I was right, things that I was wrong on the season, talking about the CDL. There's a lot of spicy ones in this video, so I'm excited to talk about them. And of course, just having a fun time talking some Call of Duty with you guys. Without further ado, let's get right into this video. Let's go. So I think we'll go like every other one. We'll do one thing I got right, one thing I got wrong, and kind of go back and forth. So we can't be getting too high on my own supply out here. You know, we gotta be fair around here. All right, so off the rip, we'll start with one thing I got right. I mean, Atlanta FaZe. I was pretty high on Atlanta FaZe throughout the whole year. I mean, as was most people. And heading into this season, I was very confident that Atlanta FaZe was going to win CoD Champs and be the best team on the season. I had them number one in like all my preseason rankings. I had, you know, FaZe, Simp, and at least some combination of all of them in the S tier of all the rankings videos. I was very high on this whole team. I really thought that they were gonna win champs. You know, I really thought that Simp had a very good chance to win the regular season MVP. Obviously, did I think that they were gonna win 3 of the 5 tournaments, finish second in one of them, and win CoD champs? Probably not. I would have probably hedged my bets a little bit more than that with like, you know, a Dallas or an OpTic or someone like that. But overall, I'll take the dubs on FaZe being the best team on the season and the preseason prediction of them winning CoD champs by the end of the year as well. I'll feel good about that one. So as for something I got wrong, speaking of Dallas, the podcast, me, Rex, and Sam, we were all very high on Illy heading into this year. And I had Illy as my MVP pick for the season as the player who I thought could really come out, take that next step up and elevate his game to like MVP levels to be that with Shotzzy on Dallas. Obviously, I was really high on Dallas heading into the season as well with Hook in the lineup, and I was very high on Hook as well. And so I would say overall, I was probably wrong about Illy, like elevating his game to like being an elite SMG or a flex in the CDL. We saw the flashes of him being unbelievable in champs in Modern Warfare at the end of last season as a flex and an SMG on the map. We saw his S&D be fantastic. And obviously snipers were one thing that we thought was gonna be in the game season long, or at least eventually in the game, and then that never really happened either. And that was one aspect where I thought Illy could really be an X factor for Dallas. So there are those things as well, just the unpredictable aspects of the season. Also with Dallas being like a mainstay top 2 team on the year, where I thought they were a lock to be top 3 all season long with that roster of Hook. Obviously things went downhill with that squad. They had to make changes, and then they had their bout of being like a, you know, middling 6 to 8 team for a few weeks there after that Hook change with Fellow. So there was kind of that weird time in there, and then of course they bounced back, and the faith in Shotzzy and Illy and Krim kind of came back, and then you brought in Vivid, and I was high on that team once they made the Vivid change. But either way, I was definitely wrong on Illy as a whole. So heading into the season last year after Roster Mania, I was on a pretty good spot with all of the 5 worst teams in the CDL. So in our first power rankings of the year before the kickoff event, before like whatever that was, when was that, in like January, I had Seattle, Toronto, LAG, or London, LAG, and Paris as my bottom 5 teams in that order. So like Seattle was at 8, then Toronto at 9, London at 10, LAG at 11, and Paris at 12. And so those were basically the 5 bottom teams until Toronto made that change. So, I mean, I was right about Toronto until they brought in Insight. So they end up having to make a change with those bottom 5 teams. And then we had Seattle, LAG, London, and Paris on the season as the 4 worst teams in the CDL. So I felt pretty good about that prediction after like looking back on it, and was very happy to see that I had those 5 teams there at the bottom overall heading into the season. So feel good about that one for sure. Was overall a pretty, I wouldn't say that was like a shocking prediction. A lot of people probably had, especially LAG, London, and Paris as probably the bottom 3 teams in league. Some people were really, really high on the Seattle squad, and then some people were still high on Toronto with Methods on that team heading into the year as well. And so that was something I was definitely overall feeling pretty good about with my predictions after last year. So one thing I was definitely wrong about on the Toronto note was Bance. I thought Bance was in a tough spot this season. I thought Bance might get dropped heading into the middle of the season. I was beyond wrong, man. Bance was unbelievable. And we saw him really have a fantastic, I think it was a map on checkmate in the kickoff event. And so after that, I was at least like, ooh, oh, okay, Bance, I see you, brother. And then I was still like hesitant to like buy into Bance. And then as things started moving on, he looked pretty good. And then when they brought it inside, everything changed and he was unreal. So as a whole on the season, I was wrong about Bance, but after we saw it in stage 2, overall, I was pretty much on board with the Benjamin Bance Express, the purple assassin unit. But I mean, I was still probably maybe a little bit lower than some people on him at the time. And overall, he continued to be really consistent. Also, I didn't buy into Toronto as quickly. I thought maybe there was a chance they were like a one-hit wonder type situation where they weren't a lock to be a top 3 team. And that was for about the first 2 weeks of stage 3. So I was a little bit wrong on Toronto there at the beginning of stage 3, or maybe throughout the most of stage 3. But after the group stages of stage 3, I was all in on Toronto being a top 2 team. And where I was right within would have been for champs. I thought FaZe was going to play Toronto in the grand finals, with FaZe winning. So I felt good about that and felt pretty dialed in overall on Toronto on the season, besides the individual town of Bance heading into the year. So I was horribly wrong on Bance heading into this season. So the last team thing that I was pretty right about, well, at least I thought was decent, was my kind of whole take on OpTic heading into the year, where I really did highlight the aspects of the long-term teamwork and thought that this team might peak at the beginning of the year, just like they have in the past. And overall, I mean, there's a debate that they did peak at the beginning of the year, like before or even stage 1 potentially. I mean, it's tough to say because like in scrims, they looked fantastic. They looked really, really good, like kind of like a solidified top 3 team. And we saw Texas Formal and the XM4. And then once we lost the XM4 after stage 2, OpTic never really found that legit footing again. You could maybe debate, you know, at stage 5, they looked pretty good and they looked really competitive there. And we saw them nearly beat Toronto and they beat FaZe in stage 5. And so there were these things where like maybe you could say they peaked at the end of the year as well. Overall, I thought the teamwork would be kind of their downfall by the end of the year, that this team would never fully click. And that's why I didn't want to predict them to win champs or be in that top 2. I had them at number 3 heading into the year. Obviously, it was hard to kind of foresee what was going to happen with New York and the whole Hydra Visa situation, and with the potential of Toronto. We didn't know that they, you know, who knew what would happen with Insight and Methods and those situations. So those are kind of hard to predict for basically anybody. As a whole, I felt pretty good about my whole OpTic take throughout the year and where I had them as a squad. So now let's get spicy, all right? Let's talk about some of the players' takes. Obviously, I tier list God Bros a lot. And there were some guys who I was definitely wrong on, some guys who I was definitely right on throughout the year. And so I want to talk about some of these guys and go through them. So let's start with the guys who I was wrong on, because at the beginning of the year, I was really high on a handful of guys who didn't work out totally. One of them, of course, was Hook. I was really high on Hook, saw him as like a top 5, top 6 SMG in the CDL heading into the season. On the podcast, I think this was, when was this? This was somewhere like in December or something. We did the top 5 players at every single position. And I had Hook at number 5 SMG in that podcast. And I really thought Hook was going to be a unit this year. And at the beginning of the year, I felt really, really good about that. Obviously, in stage 1, I was like, yo, Hook is insane. He's a top 5 player for top 5 SMG, top 5 player for sure. He's a lock. He's a unit. And then things fell apart as other teams kind of developed their team chemistry, their unity. Dallas couldn't really figure it out. It didn't really develop for him as the year moved on. And we saw him get dropped. And then he got traded to LA Thieves. And then all of that went down with all of the Addy stuff and all of the COVID stuff and all of those things that really affected Hook, put him in a really tough spot heading into roster mania. It's tough to say exactly where Hook ended up on the year. I mean, it's probably hard to say that he was inside the top, 15, 20 by the end of the year as an individual player. But even then, I still think that Hook can be a top 20 type player heading into next year and has a ton of potential to be way higher on the list. But on the season heading into this year, I was definitely wrong about Hook. I thought he would translate really, really well to 4v4 throughout the whole season, but obviously something went wrong for him and for the team throughout this year. And so I'll take the L on that one for sure. So the other 2 guys that I was really high on really were was Slasher. I was really high on Slasher heading into this year. In that same podcast, I had Slasher as my 3rd ranked AR, which I was really surprised about. I don't remember doing that, but I went back and watched that pod. I'm like, what? And so I had to go listen to it a little bit and hear what I had to say about it. I was just really excited about his situation, and I kind of saw it as a toss-up between him and like Formal and Skies as kind of my other guys there inside the top 5. So overall, I was surprised to see I had Slasher at number 3. He's definitely not the top 3 at this point, but he's still a really good player. And I think he might be a little bit slept on heading into next year as well. He's got to keep your eye on for sure. But either way, I was too high on Slasher. Definitely wrong about that one and overrated him a little bit after LA OpTic's run at the end of last year. I thought they could really make some moves heading into this one. Obviously, not the case. The other guy on that team that I was really high on was Temp. I was really high on Temp because in that same episode, I had him at the number 5 flex. So overall, I thought Temp could have a bounce back year after a down year in Modern Warfare, where he just kind of struggled to kind of figure it out on NYSL. Obviously, this year it didn't totally work out for me. Ended up getting dropped from LA Thieves, picked up by Paris, and it just never clicked. It seemed like there was always something missing for that team and for him. And in like maximizing his slang, figuring out the S&Ds again, and just something was off. And so definitely take the L on that one. He's definitely not a top 5 flex right now, but hopefully he can get back to that point heading into next year, because I would love to see Temp back in the mix again as an elite player in the CDL. So a few players who I was definitely pretty spot on with, at least heading into the year. One guy was Attach. I was really high on Attach heading into this season. I thought that this is a perfect year for Attach to kind of get back into being that perennially great top 15 type player. And that ended up being the case. I mean, obviously there was a lull there for a little while, but he started off the year really, really well. And then he slowed down a little bit, but then they brought in Standy. He looked great again. Then they load for a little bit, kind of as the Rocker did, and then he looked unbelievable again in stage 5 at Champs. Attach is great. Again, he's icy as it gets, and I had him in my A tier, I think in the first tier list heading into Cold War. And then he was hovering right around that A tier top 15 for me most of the season. So I felt pretty good about where I had Attach compared to where a lot of people in the community had Attach. And so I'll take the dub on that one for sure. Another guy, Mac. I was really high on Mac heading into this year as a flex / maybe SMG. We weren't exactly sure where he was going to be roles wise when they brought in like ASIM and Hydra and Diamond Con all those times. But overall, I had Mac as my number 3 flex on that podcast heading into the season. And he's a guy who I really, really was excited about. But then I kind of faded on him a little bit. So I guess I was right on him initially. And then after maybe like the first stage, I was like, I don't know, maybe we need to fade him a little bit. Either way, I think I was way higher on Mac than most people heading into the season. And I still think that like I had that one nailed down with Mac with NYSL and how well he played on the year. So then talking the tiers list as a whole, that first tiers list, I was really, really happy with that first tiers list. I ended up reacting to it a few weeks ago, I think right after Champs, but I was really surprised to see how well it ended up turning out. So the only player in the S, A, or B tier, so out of the top 24 players in my tier list, only one of them hit the bench, and that was Hook. So by the end of the year, Hook was the only one not in a starting lineup. And then out of the bottom 24 players, 11 of the bottom 24 ended up not being in a starting lineup at Champs. So I felt pretty good about that first tiers list kind of heading into Cold War. It was kind of my Cold War tiers list. I mean, overall, I just feel like that tier list represented kind of the talented players at the top, the guys who are mainstay contributors to a roster, and then some of the guys who might struggle on the year and be a little bit more inconsistent in the bottom half. And so I felt pretty good about that tier list and how it ended up playing out as a whole. I'll take that one as a dub as well. One player who I was unbelievably low on, who proved me beyond wrong, even more than Bance. And this was a guy who was Mac's teammate, a guy who came in last second to fill in for New York, a guy who ended up staying the whole year because he was so great, and that is ASIM, bro. Heading into this Cold War season, I was very hesitant about ASIM and the contribution they could have on a team, but the pairing with Clay ended up being exactly what ASIM needed to kind of reel him in and really like figure out how to dial in that power, that absolute beastness that ASIM has as a player. And it worked out great, man. He was a guy who I ended up having insanely low in my first tiers list, and a guy who I would have probably said had a high chance of, not seeing a roster after Hydra ended up would become, or I thought Hydra would come in, replace ASIM, and then that would be that. But man, Asim was great. He was fantastic. A slayer, a guy who played entry, a guy who could do everything around the map. And he ended up playing his life way better than I thought he would. I had a lot of worries about him kind of throwing away his life and the things that we saw at the end of Modern Warfare that still once in a while would plug him in Cold War for sure. Definitely was a problem at times for Asim on the season, but the consistency was so much better this year. And Asim was a beast. And so I was really happy to see that. He's a guy that makes the CDL better, a really great personality, a great guy to have in a scene, a really positive dude. And so it's awesome to see him succeed. And I'm so happy that I was wrong about Asim heading into this year. So the final few things here, I just want to talk about some of the rookies. So again, Hydra was one guy where I was definitely in a good spot on. I thought Hydra could be an absolute beast in the CDL. I was very high on him after watching some of the EU stuff last year. And then I watched a lot of Hydra and Challengers this year whenever I could because I was really interested to see how good he could be. And man, I was really excited about the potential of Hydra. Did I think that Hydra could make this team and kind of be the X factor for New York and make them a top 2 team for a little bit there in stage 3? I mean, probably not that high, but either way, I really did believe in Hydra. And so I felt good about kind of my overall takes on Hydra on the season and following his career path and being excited and really pumping him up as a potential guy who could be a top 10 type player in the CDL. And that's kind of where Afro is as well right now, where I feel like Afro legit could be unbelievable next year. I just hope that London could put the right guys around him to make him really tick, kind of like New York did. So he's an exciting one for sure. And the other 2 interesting cases would have been Standy. I was really high on Standy as well. And I even talked about Standy heading into Cold War, about him being a guy that I wanted to see in the CDL in Cold War because I thought he could legitimately be a playmaker, a game changer for a team. And so I felt really good about the Standy take as well as a guy who I really thought could be that dude. He could be that guy. And he ended up being that guy for sure. So I felt good about that one. Insight's an interesting one where I didn't really feel like I had a good feel for Insight, even though we saw a lot of really good things from him in the AM scene from the European side of things. He wasn't a dude who I was beating the drum on like he needs to get in here. But what started teasing me or getting me excited was seeing Insight in the NA scene this year and then him being a beast. So where I was really wrong was kind of like the prospects of him after watching him from EU, where I wasn't as excited about him in the EU scene. But then he came over to the NA scene and was dominating here. And that's where I was like, okay, this makes sense. We should probably give him a chance, even though I was a little bit hesitant to bring Insight in for Methods. And I thought Methods was playing well. And so when that happened, I was definitely not like really high on it. So I would say overall, I underestimated Insight and the impact that he would have when replacing Methods. Methods is the key here because I thought Methods was a pretty good player. But overall, the teamwork, the chemistry with that squad of 4 was perfect. And Insight was exactly the player they needed. So I did not see that level of transformation coming, to say the least. I did not see that coming. Even though I thought Insight could really be a good player and deserved a chance in CDL. So it's kind of like a both. I guess it's kind of a both category where I was wrong and right about that. More wrong than right about Insight's impact when replacing Methods. So the last guy, also on Toronto, Cammy. I have him in my both category, a guy who I wanted to talk about at the end of this video because he was a dude who I was really high on last season. I was really high on Cammy and Kleenex last year in Modern Warfare. I said multiple times, I thought that both of these guys could be top 15 type players in the CDL, guys who could be legit all-star level players for teams. And I said that multiple times last year in Modern Warfare. This year, I wasn't totally sold in 4v4 on either of them. I was more sold on Cammy than I was on Kleenex. I was a little bit more worried about Kleenex kind of being a guy who was just really good in the mix, and I wasn't sure if he could translate to 4v4. So I was a little bit more hesitant on Kleenex. And so I would say I was wrong about both of them somewhat initially, once in the middle of the year. But early on, I was very high, especially on Cammy. And people called me people said I was riding Toronto at the beginning of the year. And I'm like, what in the world? Like, no, I'm definitely not riding Toronto. And like I said, I was so wrong about Bance. And so overall, I mean, as a squad, once this team got established with Insight, and like I talked about how I doubted them a little bit after stage 2 even, I was all in on this squad. You know, from stage 3, stage 4, stage 5, champs, I had them predicted to be in my top 2 at champs. So like overall, I thought this team had it all. And I was surprised to see people calling me a Cammy hater at the end of the year, because I know I didn't have him in S tier in one tier rankings video, even though I had him. I said he was the first guy out, and it was like between him and Dashy. So it was insanely close. People overblow that stuff. So I just don't think I was like a Cammy hater by any means on the year, because I was very much a Cammy stan throughout the last year and a half. So just kind of a one I wanted to throw in there. It's kind of a both one to talk about with you guys as well. So I hope this video was interesting. I don't really know. It ended up being way longer than I thought it was going to be. I thought this could be like a 10-minute video, but either way, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Enjoyed hanging out, talking some COD, talking through these players. If you guys did, drop a comment down below. If you remember any other places where I was right, where I was wrong, I'd love to talk to you guys about that down in the comments. Always a fun time. And again, this is always the point of these videos is to be transparent. Look back on where I can be right, where I can be wrong, and how I can fix my process and make it even better heading into next year. And so hopefully my note-taking process, you know, this year, obviously, like I talked about on Twitter, my notes ended up being 240 pages long with a mega doc of notes. And I kind of want to, like, I don't know, fix that process, make it a little bit cleaner, and make it even easier for myself to rate the players more accurately, and maybe talk about some of the more outlier potential outcomes, look at the range of outcomes better for players. So we'll see. We'll be talking a lot more about that later. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, share the video if you guys really enjoyed it. As always, guys, I'm your boy SalvationsElite, and guys, we'll see you next time. I'm out.